Okay, we're now going to read the second part of Edgar Allan Poe's The Pit and the Pendulum. If you recall from our first part, our main character was taken by the torturers and he was dropped down into what he thought was some kind of hole or cave or something like that, and it's completely black, which causes him a lot more fear, and who can blame him that? And when we pick it up today, he's stuck in that blackness. I'm going to ask you a question. You're dropped in a place like that, and it's completely black. You can't see a thing. Do you walk around and try to feel where you are and discover the room that you're in, or do you just huddle down and stay and not look anywhere because there could be dangers, there could be traps in this room? Remember, their purpose is to torture and kill you. So possibly there could be something wrong in this room that could get you if you walk around in it, whether it be animals or spikes or holes or who knows? It could be anything. I like the idea of a pit, considering the name of this is The Pit and the Pendulum. So let's read. Also, recall, please, your homework assignment for tonight is, let me show you real quick. Let's go to my Chrome tab. Let's open it up. You're going to have to do annotations again for tonight. What I'm asking you for, again, is 3 to 5 annotations. You're going to see that I've already done 2 of these annotations. I'm going to show you how to do a couple of more. And at the end of this assignment for tomorrow, you're going to make sure you have at least 3 to 5. So let's say 3 minimum, 5 maximum of notes. And remember, those notes are supposed to be dealing with how fear either negatively affects the main character or causes him to do something stupid. So let's go back. And let's read. Okay, so we're on the top of page 4. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo. Of the dungeons there had been strange things narrated, fables I had always deemed them, but yet strange, and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in the subterranean world of darkness, or was fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness, I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or destroyed me. Let's take a look at that. That's a definite quote that I put down because it deals with fear. Notice I say the mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. Notice I close my quotes. I don't put a period after the closed quotes. I put the parentheses. I put a 4. That tells me it came from page 4 of the story. I close my parentheses, and then I put my period afterwards. And I have an annotation. Look at the quote, by the way. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. All he can think about is when and how he's going to die. I mean, who could blame him? Take a look at my annotation. This quote clearly shows that not knowing how or when they will kill him causes him extreme fear. Who can blame him? I know I can't. And they're doing that to him on purpose, by the way. They're making him feel this fear just for fun. This is all about torture. Oh, let's go back to our story. So I would go to here, and here we are. Let's continue. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit and return to the point whence I set out, without being aware of the fact. So perfectly uniform seemed the wall. I therefore sought the knife which had been in my pocket, which led into the inquisitorial chamber, but it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. I had thought of forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry so as to identify my point of departure. In other words, what he was going to do was stick the knife in the wall, and he was going to climb around the wall until he came back to his knife so he could count how big this room is. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although in the disorder of my fancy it seemed at first insuperable. I tore a part of the hem from the robe and placed the fragment at full length at right angles to the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So at least I thought, but I had not counted upon the extent of the dungeon or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time when I stumbled and fell. So let's see what he's trying to do. He ripped off a piece of his shirt and he put it on the ground, and he's going to walk around in a circle. And when he gets back to that piece of fiber that he ripped off, the rag that he ripped off, then he'll know that's the end of the room, and then he'll know how big this room is. It's actually a decent idea. I staggered onward for some time when I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon awakening and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher with water. I was too exhausted to reflect upon the circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterward, I resumed my tour around the prison, and with much toil came at last upon the fragment of the search. Up to the period when I fell, I had counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk, I had counted 48 more when I arrived at the rag. There were in all, then, 100 paces, and admitting 2 paces to the yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault, for vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, certainly no hope these researches, but a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Also, he has nothing else to do, so he continues searching around counting. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. So first he went around in a circle around the wall, and now he wants to walk across the middle of this room. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a line as possible. I had advanced some 10 or 12 places in this manner when the remnant of the torn hem of a robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it, and I fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance, which yet, in a few seconds afterward, and while I still lay prostrate, arrested my attention. So check this out. As he's crossing this dark room, now across the middle, trying to figure out how big it is and what's in this room that he's in, he fell, luckily, on that piece of rag that he ripped off his clothes, or the sack that they have him wearing, and he fell right down onto his face. Notice what happens. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at a less elevation than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. So he realizes when he falls that there's a hole where his forehead is, and there's this nasty vaporish smell coming up from in this hole. Listen. I put forward my arm and shuddered to find that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm into the descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into water, succeeded by loud echoes. So what he did was he dropped a little stone down into this dark hole, and he heard it falling for a long time before it splashed into some water. So what he found out is that there's this basically a well very deep in the middle of this room, and had he have fallen into that, he would be trapped down in that well. Listen. At the same moment, excuse me, at the same moment, there came a sound resembling the quick opening and a rapid closing of a door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom as it suddenly faded away. Interesting. The minute they heard something splash down into the water, then they opened up a trap door up and above in the room to look down and see. What do they see? What are they hoping to see? I think they're hoping to see this man having fallen down into the well and is either dead down there or is dying down there in a torturous state. Instead, they see him lying and looking down into the hole. So they have been foiled right now. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and I congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped it. Another step before my fall, and the world would see me no more. And the death just avoided was that of the very character which I regarded as fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting the Inquisition. Listen, to the victim of its tyranny, there was the choice of death with its direst physical agonies, or death with its most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. Let's reserve that again. To the victim of its tyranny was the choice of death with its direst physical agonies. In other words, a painful death, or death with its most mortal, hideous horrors, which means a slow death that you don't know what's happening. He had been reserved for the latter. By long suffering, my nerves had been unstrung until I trembled at the sound of my own voice, and had become in every aspect or respect a fitting subject for the torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall. Let's highlight that one right there. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall. That's a definite note about fear. Look, I have this copied down already. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall. What does that tell us? This quote clearly shows that he is so terrified that every part of his body is shaking. Now that is terrified. I've seen people shake because they're so afraid. My daughters will do that sometimes if they have a bad nightmare or something. I'll come in to catch them and they'll be shaking. They're so afraid. After I calm them down, the shaking subsides. But sometimes you can't stop that from happening. Something else that fear causes you to do, causes you to shake. Let's continue. Let's go back. Well, you know what I didn't do? I didn't show you that tab. Let me show it to you. Oh, no, that one. There you go. Just wanted to show you this in case that didn't just show up right there. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall. This quote clearly shows that he is so terrified, every part of his body is shaking. Now that is terrified. Okay, let's go back. Let's continue reading. Okay. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving to perish rather than risk the terror of the wells, of which my imagination now pictured many in various positions about the dungeon. So now he's worried there might be these wells all throughout the dungeon. He can't know that. In other conditions of my mind, I might have courage to end my misery at once by a plunge into one of these abysses, but now I was the veriest of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. That is a note. Let me set this up. Let's go back to our note page where you should be writing this down. Here we go. Ready? Neither could I forget. Quotes. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits. This is an interesting quote right here. That the sudden extinction of life sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Formed no part of their most horrible plan. All right, I put my page number. This comes from page 5 as well, and then my period goes afterwards. Now, this quote clearly shows what? Let's read this again. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no harm. Oh my gosh, I figured this out. This quote clearly shows that they do not mean him to die after he falls. No, they mean him to suffer in agony. Let me fix suffer. They mean him to suffer in agony at the bottom of the well. Now that is scary. All right. Now that is scary. Let's put an exclamation point about that. Excellent. Let's continue. All right. Next line actually becomes another quote for us. I'm just going to read it without coming back. Look, agitation of spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Agitation, this is a fear quote, of spirit kept me awake for many long hours. Now, since I'm not going to finish this quote with a period, I'm going to stop right in the middle of that sentence. I'm just going to put a ... finish my quotes, put my page number in parentheses, of course. This is page number 5 again, and then my period. And this quote clearly shows he is so afraid he cannot sleep. Let's go back. Excellent. Let's stop. Let's go back. And let's continue reading. Upon arousing, I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. It must have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I picked... I want to ask you a question. Why do they keep feeding him if they're trying to kill him? Because they want him to suffer. Think about that. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, of course, I know not. But when once again I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible. By a wild sulphurous luster, the origin of which I could not at first determine, I was able to see the extent of my prison. So when he wakes up, they're now showing him his prison. And I wonder why they're showing it to him. Is it because they now know he knows there's holes, or at least one? Let's continue. In its size, I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuits of its walls did not extend 25 yards. For some minutes, this fact occasioned me a world of vain trouble. Vain indeed. For what could be of less importance under this terrible circumstances which environed me than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. So I realized the room is a lot smaller than he thought it was in its darkness, and he has nothing better to do, so he figures out how he made that mistake. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I had counted 52 paces, up to the period when I fell. I must have been within a pace or two of the fragment of surge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon waking, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circle nearly double what it actually was. So what he thinks happened is, remember he put that piece of rug or the rag in the wall, and then he had walked around, and before he found it, he fell and passed out. Well, when he woke up, he didn't realize it was right next to him, so he walked all the way around again. He must have fallen right near that rag, so he did it twice. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with the wall to the left and ended it with the wall to my right. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions or niches at odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken from masonry now seemed to be iron or some other metal in huge plates whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all hideous and repulsive devices to which the carnal superstition of the monks had given rise. The figures of fiends in aspects of menace, with skeletal forms and other more really fearful images, overspread and disfigured the walls. So they actually put into these walls the figures of monsters and angry and awful and monstrous people to cause more fear. Let's put that on our list. That looks like a good quote to write down because it is about fear. These things cause him fear. So let's go. The figures of fiends, in aspects of menace, in aspects of with skeleton forms, and other more really fearful images, overspread and disfigured the walls. Disfigured the walls. Okay, no period, remember. I put my my quotation marks, then my parentheses, and I put the page 6 in there, and a period afterwards. And this quote clearly shows they want him to what? They put these pictures of these fiends and these monsters on the walls. What are they trying to do? This quote clearly shows that they are trying to, did I not space that? Excuse me. Trying to cause him as much fear as possible before they execute him. And it works. Okay, let's go back. We're almost done with today's reading. Let's stop presenting. Let's go back and let's keep reading. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the colors seemed faded effects of a damp atmosphere. I now noticed the floor too, which was of stone. In the center yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped. But it was the only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly and by much effort, for my personal condition had been greatly changed during slumber. I now lay upon my back and at full length on a species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bound by a long strap resembling a surcingle. I looked up what a surcingle is, and it's a strap that goes around a horse's chest. So it's a leather strap. So now they have him tied to a wooden structure, and he's strapped to it. He cannot move enough. It passed in many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm to such extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from an earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. So he can still move one of his arms and reach down and grab food and feed himself. Clearly, they want him to live so that they can cause him more fear and more terror. Listen, and this is a good quote as well. You can type this down yourselves. I saw too, to my horror, that the pitcher had been removed. I say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst, it appeared to be the design of my persecutors to simulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. So we have one last note for today, and then we're going to stop. I saw too, to my horror, that the pitcher had been removed. I say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. He freaks out and feels fear because he realized they took his water away, but they left him really spicy food. So he's going to suffer even more. And I wonder, quick question, this might be my little note. This quote clearly shows how afraid he is that he might die of thirst. Is that a fear that everybody feels somewhere deep inside them, this idea that they would die of thirst or hunger? It's got to be a really terrible way to go because it lasts for days and days and days. I wonder about that. I know I would not want to go that way. All right, so we're done with part 2 of 4 of The Pit and the Pendulum. Please make sure that today, I will show you one last time. Let's go back and look. That you have your answers done for today and you have them typed and ready to go or handwritten, and you could take a picture and show me that way. Notice that I have a quote. I have the page number in parentheses after the quote and the period after, and I explain this quote. This quote clearly shows how blank. Make sure you have this for all of yours. How many do we have for today? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 quotes for today. Excellent job, everybody. Let's stop presenting that. Let's go back here and let's stop for today. We'll pick it up from tomorrow from this point, him being strapped down and tied. I think they're going to do something to him. Let's wait.